there's got to be more. Like, this is crazy. Like, I didn't become an entrepreneur to get wealthy. I became an entrepreneur because I want to do some hard things. This doesn't really seem all that hard.
Welcome to the Business as Mission Canada podcast. We're here to share missional business stories from Canada and beyond. Our hope is that this conversation will help build and challenge your view of what God could do in and through your business. We're glad you've joined us. Now let's dive into today's episode.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the BAM Canada podcast. I'm excited to be joined today by Dylan Gallagher, who is the founder of OndeWork and director of Aztec Group. Dylan, welcome.
Thanks, Ruth. Happy to be here.
So, Dylan, tell us just a little bit about yourself to start us off.
I'm a father of 5 kids, 2 of which are now young men. I have 3 daughters that are teenagers. I'm a husband of 27 years and a business owner that has been in the trenches since 2001. And
Wow.
all of those things have strengthened my faith, have challenged my faith, and also get me really excited to jump out of bed every day to see how God's using me as his hands and feet out in the world. But an entrepreneur at heart, for sure.
Nice. Yeah, that's a lot of things to keep you busy pretty much 24/7, it sounds like. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially the entrepreneur part. I'm curious to know what your first job was.
Believe it or not, I somehow in high school, I was a terrible student. I was a C student at
Okay.
best.
Wow.
And somehow in high school, I was able to get a work experience program in grade 11 instead of in grade 12.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up working for a record store. I worked for an entrepreneur. It was the very first job I ever had. And being a teenager in high school, taking every afternoon to go work in a record store was beyond rad. It was
Yeah, the
awesome.
dream.
So that was the dream. It was so that was the very first job I had, believe it or not. And I was responsible for all the dance, R&B, rap music. And our record store was the most popular record store in our city. And all
Okay.
the DJs would come in and buy big 12-inch vinyl. And so I was responsible for figuring out which vinyl to buy.
Mm-hmm.
Off of that, a buddy and my buddy and of mine and I started a like a rave weekend party business.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wild. It was
Yeah.
totally wild. So that was my very first job. I worked for an
Wow.
entrepreneur who owned a little tiny record store, and then it grew, and then it grew, and then he
Mm.
ended up having the largest one in Calgary at the time. Sam the Record Man was the record store.
Okay. I'm curious to know if anybody listening remembers Sam the Record Man, because that
Oh
would be
man,
awesome.
I'm pretty old, but the marquee store was downtown Toronto, had the 2 big records
Mm-hmm.
in its sign. But here in Calgary, yeah, the entrepreneur and his brother were able to get like a really large store. And in Calgary, just had artists coming through all the time. So I got
Yeah.
to go to tons of concerts and got to meet lots of different artists. And I mean, it was unbelievable, just
Yeah.
totally unbelievable.
Man, for a 16-year-old, that sounds like honestly as good
Oh,
as it gets. Like, I don't
it was
know that you
awesome.
can top that.
It was good, but also it got me into a lot of trouble. It led me down some paths that I certainly I'm hopeful my kids don't go down.
Right.
Somehow I came out on the other side, which gives me
Mm-hmm.
hope that no matter what my kids do, they're going to turn out okay.
Yeah.
But that's yeah, that's kind of where it all started. And leading
Wow.
up to that, just as a side note, as a kid, so grade 8, grade 9, grade
Mm-hmm.
10, I read just tons of biographies. Loved the story
Really?
of people who took nothing and made it into something.
Yeah.
I come from a broken home and
Mm.
like low income and all that sort of thing. And so instead of reading fiction stories, which I did read as a younger kid, as I got older, I started reading stories about people with their business ventures and just got captivated by like the romance of
Yeah.
having nothing and making something outstanding out of it. And so to be able to work for an entrepreneur as my first job was pretty neat because I'd read all these stories about these entrepreneurs
Yeah.
and being able to work for one was awesome. And I didn't know anyone who had like a 30-year career in my
Right.
social circle growing up. Nobody went to university that I knew of, like none of my parents,
Yeah.
friends, or anyone went to school. And so like entrepreneur, it just was, I think, the first thing that captured my imagination. And then
Hmm.
I've been on that train ever since.
That's really interesting because most kids read comic books or they read like
Oh, I
Geronimo
read those
Stilton.
too. I got
Yeah.
a good stack of Calvin and Hobbes that now my
Okay.
kids enjoy. But no, it was honestly, in fact, I think I have it here somewhere. Anyway, there, yeah, here it is. This was the first book I ever read. It's called uh, Greatest Business Stories of All Time. It was put up by Forbes magazine, and it's 20 stories of entrepreneurs, like super easy to read.
Yeah.
But like this was it. This was the
Wow.
trigger for everything else.
Yeah. So that's interesting though, because you said that you were a C student. So you didn't enjoy learning in school, but learning on your own terms, that was a completely different story.
And now that I have a pile of kids, I can kind of see where the disconnect was for me
Mm,
growing up. I probably would have been a good student, but my folks got divorced. My
yeah.
parents never finished high school. So they didn't really know what it meant to be a good student. So there was no possible way. My dad raised us. And so
Mhm.
there was no way my dad was going to teach me how to be a good student. And then me
Yeah.
and all my buddies, like we were all C students.
Okay.
So like you are the result of who you hang
Yeah.
around.
Birds of a feather.
So it wasn't so much that I couldn't have been one. I just didn't really have the mentorship or the guidance to be able to kind of test that.
Yeah. And so then did you find that reading these books and working at the record store, did those actually give you a good foundation to become an entrepreneur? Or when you stepped into that life, were you completely unprepared?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with unprepared.
Okay.
I don't know at what moment you become an entrepreneur. I certainly think that some people, at least in my experience so far, some people just know, hey, I have lots of examples in my life of a way that life should be lived, and I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna kind of look to model that. So my dad was a lawyer, my mom was a dentist, or whatever the
Mhm.
case might be. You have like some examples growing up of what that looked like, and I didn't. And so I reading these books, I ended up working for an entrepreneur. The very next job I had was for an entrepreneur, and so all of a sudden it fills in the gaps.
Yeah,
And then one day you wake up and you're like, well, I'm going to go do this. And so I did.
you did it. And was it a straight line? Was it out of high school, you went straight into starting your first startup, or did you work in some other industry before you got into entrepreneurship?
So I was walking home from a girlfriend's house one day and a guy stopped me and said, hey, do you live around here? And I said, yeah, I live just kind of up the hill around the corner. Yada yada. He says, oh, I says, I just got back from a business trip. I noticed you just walked out of that house. I'm your neighbor. And any chance that you're not doing anything in the next couple days, you can come by and cut my grass. Like I'll give you $20. My wife's giving me a hard time, yada
Yeah.
yada yada. So I went back the next day. I said, yeah, sure, of course. Not knowing that I've never used a lawnmower before. I never
Okay.
cut grass. We lived in low income housing, so there wasn't really a
Mhm.
lot of grass to cut or learn
Yeah.
on. And I said, yeah, sure. So he left the mower out. The next day I went and cut the grass. I left him a little note because it kind of made sense to me that the edges didn't look very clean. And I
Hmm.
said, you didn't leave out the edge trimmer, but if you leave it out, I'll come back tomorrow.
Right.
So he called me that night, and one thing led to another, and he ended up hiring me to be an administrative assistant for him. He had just finished working for the government, and he was raising money from investors to fund private mortgages for developers and builders in our city. Second mortgages, first mortgages, kind of high risk money.
Hmm.
And so I went to work for him for 5 years, and there's a whole chapter of life I won't break open there. But in 2001, I had kind of risen up through the organization. I'd helped open a bunch of branch offices, raised a pile of money, foreclosed on people, finished out projects, just became like a turnaround, work it out kind of
Hmm.
guy. And I went to the management team and just said, hey, later this year, like August, September, I'm going to go start my own brokerage. And
Okay. Yeah.
so I gave them an entire year, and that was because I actually needed to get a mortgage for a home that Lisa and I were going to buy, but I couldn't get a mortgage as a self-employed individual.
Right.
So I stayed there, and so in 2001 I took the leap. So it was pretty planned. It was pretty specific. There was like a straight line, and then that's pretty much where the straight line ends, because then, as any entrepreneur knows, it zigs and zags all over the place.
Yeah. And what were those first, let's say, 2 years of owning your own brokerage? What was that like?
It was. it was awesome and scary all at the same time. I did have a backstop that Lisa was finishing her university degree and was working part-time, so she was able to make sure that we could keep the lights on. And I
Mhm.
was really, really blessed because there were about 12, without getting into the details, there were about 12 individuals I had been managing money for in various real estate projects. And when I was looking at making the move, it was because there were a bunch of industry changes happening. And they all said, look, we don't really like these industry changes, but if you go out on your own and you keep finding opportunities, then we'll keep working with you
Mhm.
and you can be our workhorse. And so it was scary, but it was also a lot of fun. And then from there, I was able to figure out how to leverage my license into some other opportunities that resulted in us having the largest, what would be called non-flagged brokerage in Canada. So these were independent brokerages that weren't associated with a national franchise,
Mhm.
weren't associated with a specific bank. We were true independent brokers helping builders, developers, homeowners, investors get mortgages for real estate properties.
Right. And so then walk me through what your faith life looked like in those years working for somebody else and then also those early years of starting your own business.
So the faith part really didn't kick in until I hit kind of the first cliff in my entrepreneurial journey, which was during the financial crisis. So that was 2009. And I had never been part of a market downturn. I had heard about the 80s because all of the people I had was managing money for, they all had mortgages in the early 80s that were 20% and 21%. And so I kind of heard about it, but I never experienced it. And so my faith was what would you call it? Maybe just sort of token faith at that point.
Okay.
I was a Christian. I
Mm.
wasn't living out my faith so much. I was on a finance board for our church. Lisa and I had built a community outreach program where people could make anonymous requests on a website for things that they needed. People could respond anonymously, and then
Yeah.
the exchange would happen at a church. So I was doing, like there was an undertone of faith, but it wasn't really tested or pressed on until that financial crisis hit. And then it was a all hell broke loose for a decade of my
Mhm.
life. Well, I really had to figure out, what do I believe? Why do I believe it? Is what I believe even true? Um, and that took me down a decade of trying to answer that question. So to begin with, it was there, but it wasn't pressing on me. I was more of a token. It was more token faith. You just
Mhm.
good morals, good values, you
Yeah.
do the right things, you live a straight life, as it were. You have two kids, so now you start going to church more, like that kind of
Yeah.
faith. Whereas it wasn't pressure tested or battle tested until the real first crisis in my journey.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think it's a story that is fairly familiar in entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs alike, where you grow up with a certain belief system. And that belief system is just kind of like almost like white noise in your life, where it's there. Yeah, I believe this, and yeah, I do this, but the actual meat of the belief and the actual, I guess, heart of it doesn't really appear until for some reason you hit what may be rock bottom or just really difficult times.
I think there's that old idea that, why do I've always thought it interesting that the only people that ever really responded to the message of Christ when he was walking around doing his thing were desperate people, because faith was all they had. When I began my entrepreneurial journey in 2001 straight through to 2008, I mean, our city was on a tear. The market was doing well. Oil was $110 a barrel.
Mm,
So, I mean, what did I need to pressure test my faith for? There
yeah.
wasn't there wasn't anything in my life that made me think I have to figure out why I'm a Christian or what this means to me. And I think that that's probably the reason, right? If you never get your back up against the wall, and if you never have a reason to have faith, then
Hmm.
you just have faith.
Right. It's not yours. It's there. Okay, so I mean, you said all hell broke loose, which is pretty descriptive, but also what did that look like and how exactly did that push you into this search for a deeper faith?
So the short version would be that the summer of 2007, life was like most entrepreneurs almost too easy. You get
Mm.
success, because everything was great, the market
Yeah.
was great, the city was great, everything was great. Um, you hit a plateau and you're like, this is easy. How come everyone's not an entrepreneur?
Yeah.
Right? So this 2007, the
Uh-huh.
financial crisis was February of 2009. And so what had happened over that summer was I just was feeling like this can't be it. I'm about to turn 30. Like this was as hard as it was to be successful. This is like super empty. This is not fulfilling.
Oh
Although I love
man.
our team, I love the things I have, yada, yada, yada. There's got to be more. Like this is crazy. Like I didn't
Mhm.
become an entrepreneur to get wealthy. I became an entrepreneur because I want to do some hard things. This doesn't really seem all that hard. And so I went around to the dozen or so guys that I was managing money for, and I asked them two questions. I said, if you made 1 million, how come you didn't make 10? If you made 10, how come you didn't make 100, et cetera? And then the second question was, um, if like, why is it that you do the thing it is that you do? Or why did you do it if you've now sold your business and exited? And so all of them pretty much had the same answer. So the answer to the first question was, I'm still working on it. And the answer to the second question was, well, this is all I knew how to do. And I thought, really? Like,
Yeah.
those answers are so insufficient.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
again, another long story that would take another episode to explain. But my wife, Lisa, knew that Richard Branson was my hero
Mm.
and had found a way to arrange for me to meet him in October. So these conversations happened over the summer, leading
Yeah.
into my birthday in October. I was able to hang out with Richard Branson, and we got to know each other and see each other a bunch of times. And I ended up being able to ask him the same questions. And wouldn't you believe he had the same answers? And I was
Yeah.
like,
Okay.
first of all, never meet your heroes, because then you're
Yeah.
going to find out they're just ordinary people,
Yeah. They're just
and
like you.
they don't have like the secret sauce. And then second, I just thought, wow, like if that's his answer, this is terrible. And
Mm.
so leading into 2008, the timeline's really important. Leading into 2008, in this moment of despair, I thought, you know what? I'm a Christian. Like I have the t-shirt. I'm involved in my
You
church and
have
my
t-shirt.
community, and I'm living a moral life, all those sorts of things. But what does it actually mean? And is it the right thing to believe? And so I started pursuing, believe it or not, I started listening to Joel Osteen. Then I
Hmm.
found that was a little too flaky for me. So I moved on to Rick Warren. I found that to be, over a period of time, that turned out not to have enough answers. And so that kind of led me down Timothy Keller, John MacArthur, John Piper,
Yeah. The
yada,
heavy
yada, yada.
hitters.
Yeah, heavy hitters. And I started listening to debates about theology. I started researching other religions to understand, like, why is this attractive to people? These other religions, Mormons, Catholics, Buddhists, like, what is it that is there? And anyway, you fast forward, and little did I know that God kind of gave me a year to get ready because in February of 2009, I remember that we had a couple dozen agents working for us. We had millions of dollars of funding that went through our brokerage every month. And literally within 48 hours, everything stopped. Banks were not funding the mortgages they had committed to giving people who were buying homes. Banks were not funding the business loans and the commercial mortgages that were being used for businesses to buy properties or like the entire world stopped. And
Oh
I
my
had a front row
goodness.
seat to it. And
Yeah.
so, you know, it was only a year and a half earlier when I was thinking, oh man, this is
This
like
is too
easy.
easy.
And then so February 2009 comes along, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking, okay, this will go away. Like next month, everything should return. And then next month turned into next month, turned into next month. And, as I'm spending the next decade repairing my life because of the financial obligations that I had taken on, the very poor financial decisions I had made, some bets that I took that didn't work. So
Hmm.
while I'm trying to repair my own life, right beside that, I'm learning about my faith in a very, very real way because I needed something much more substantial to hang on to as I'm fighting to support a family, as I'm
Yeah.
fighting to work my way out of the big joke, of course, was I couldn't even go get a job because I couldn't afford a job. Like I had to figure out a way.
Yeah.
The mountain of problems were so huge that I simply had to just shoulder through it. And so that's sort of how all that came together. And that was the decade of hell. My wife calls it the Great Fall.
The Great Fall. That sounds like the title of like a 1920 novel, The Great Fall.
Yeah, yeah, no question.
Yeah. So I'd love to know if you know, like, what is it specifically, or what was it specifically about your faith that got you through that time?
I think it wasn't my faith specifically as much as it was my tenacity to find something to stand on. And as I kept crawling through the content, as I kept pushing around these ideas in my head, it just kept coming up obvious that the Judeo-Christian belief, the life of Christ in particular, is really the only thing worth standing on. Just this radical idea that life is not about you, that it's about serving God, which I know a lot of people struggle with because that's very esoteric. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
But then the other idea of just serving others as you would serve yourself, they're so simple, those ideas. But when you're stuck, that idea of serving others was the only thing that kept me afloat because that it was almost like it turned the attention away from all my problems that were
Mm,
festering
yeah.
internally. And so when I started thinking about my debts and my credit card payments and the investors I owed money to and the employees that I had let go and the people I had really annoyed, if I looked towards myself, it became very difficult to move forward. But the minute I spent a decade, a little bit more than a decade doing management consulting to pay the bills. And that put me in a position where I had the opportunity to serve other entrepreneurs that were in very difficult situations. And so that whole looking out, how can I serve? That's what got me
Hmm.
through it. But that's based on this foundation of a Christian faith.
So it's interesting to hear you talk because for most people, especially believers, there's kind of a before and after period in terms of integrating faith and work. So there's a before where Sundays are for the sacred and Saturday to Friday is, well, that's just your life. You know, you live your life, you don't really include your faith in it. Then there's the after where your faith and your work are beginning to be integrated. But for you, it sounds like this journey that you went on, it kind of just meshed the two of them. Like there was no work without faith, faith without work. They were intertwined.
Yeah, I just was in a really tough spot. I mean, I couldn't, it wasn't like I could just put the t-shirt on Sundays and take it off on Mondays because
Yeah, you needed it.
I needed it. I mean, I desperately, desperately needed to believe that all the mistakes I made someday would be redeemed, that that notwithstanding how difficult everything appeared to be, that God is who he says he is. He's not away. He's
Yeah.
not like distant and unapproachable. And so like it was Sunday to Sunday working out my faith. And through all of it, I never, unlike I think many people sort of question God. They're like, hey, God, why would you do this? I hear that all the time when I share my story and when I talk with other entrepreneurs. I never took that posture though, because I read, as every struggling entrepreneur will, you end up reading Job. And it just struck me that when he finally did hear from God, those basic questions of like, hey, did you create the universe? Like, were
Yeah.
you there when I did these things? And that
Humbling.
just that just landed like right center in my heart very quickly. And over that decade, before I had kind of gone down this path, I had already said to myself, I'm prepared for things not to make sense on the surface. I'm prepared for there to be conflicts. I'm prepared for there to be differing ideas that don't seem to line up, contradictions, but that won't prevent me from continuing to figure this out because I'm not the smartest guy in the world. And I'm certainly not smart enough to accuse God of like not knowing what he's doing. So for some
Right.
reason I could just hold on to those ideas. So as I went down this path, it was never wagging a finger at God as much as it was understanding, okay, I just don't know yet. And I believe that it'll make sense one day.
Yeah. And I mean, it seems like it's making sense. You're walking the walk and you're not just talking the talk. I'd love to know now, what does it look like practically for you to live out those two values of serving God and serving others, but through your business?
So through our business, that servant leadership is kind of a overused term that maybe doesn't have the same grip that it once did when it came out as an idea. But I do view what I'm doing as so we're in a construction, we're in a business where our workforce generally gets overlooked by society, by culture.
Hmm.
A lot of the folks that we have the opportunity to lead every day, they're not going to make the headlines, they're not going to invent the next big thing. They're typically new to the country, new to the city. They've come to Canada for a better life. And we've made it our mission. I've made it my mission to make sure that our workplace is the least stressful place in their life. And so what does that look like? That looks like having the best benefits package that we possibly can afford. It means paying people weekly. It means paying them fairly. It means working with every single one of them to make sure that they understand that they're valuable, that we'd love to help them be more valuable, that we
Yeah.
won't do the work for them, but we will come alongside of them. And to the extent that they want to better their station in life, that we want to be the ground underneath their feet that they do that on. So it gives me this sense of, again, much like when I was doing management consulting, it turns the attention away from me as an individual and pushes it towards our team. And how can I serve our management team? How can I serve the folks in the field? How can I make sure that our reputation and our brand and the customers that we serve has high integrity, but not high integrity just like we say what we're going to do, but like they can come to a job site and they can measurably see that what we do is measurably better
Right.
in terms of quality, in terms of the workforce that we have than anybody else. So this idea of serving, but again, I'm trying to break open servant leadership because that can just be a generic overlooked word. But I wake up every day trying to figure out how can I help make the folks that we have under our care more valuable. Because if we can focus on them, make them more valuable, then of course we're going to be more valuable, and the cycle
Hmm.
continues.
Is this because this you don't hear that often? Like you see it on websites and you see people, talk about values driven, integrity driven, but to actually see that worked out through business isn't, I don't think, as common. Um, so how do you find, I guess, like-minded people to come alongside you on this vision? Because you can set the vision and you can have the goal, but if you don't have the right people, it kind of falls apart.
I don't think I don't think you find the right people, and if you can, I'm not sure that's my use, kind of my context. My context is you hire for attitude and aptitude, and then if I'm living it out, people sort of fall in line, and
Mm,
it becomes
yeah.
somewhat of a self-cleansing oven. So, for example, if when there's a situation, a serious situation that happens in a given day, and I step up and say, "Look, that was my miss," because I'm here to serve all of you. So if somehow I miss that, it means that I didn't prepare the people that were supposed to catch it. It means I wasn't thinking about it. It means I wasn't asking enough questions. So you know, when you when someone sees you doing that enough times,
Yeah.
they're like, wait a minute, that's weird. Like the owner says
Mm,
it's his problem and
yeah.
he didn't like give me crap for it. Like over time, that culture just starts to create itself, and people that don't fit that culture, they don't stay because they
Right.
just can't get on board with it.
Right. Yeah.
Lots of people in my position, I think, would say, "Hey, I'm taking all the risk. You're lucky to be here. Stop complaining. If there's a problem, it was your fault." Like that, I think is very traditional. And in the position I'm in, I've simply tried to do it a different way. And again, like I've had a front row seat to a train crash, and I've spent a decade, more than a decade, working with other entrepreneurs. And so I feel incredibly blessed that people show up every day to want
Right.
to work with me, not for me, but with me. And I take that to be a huge responsibility. And honestly, it's really fun. I think a lot of entrepreneurs get burdened down with the stuff in their business and they forget that their business is actually people. And it's unfortunate when I meet an entrepreneur that doesn't love people, because if you don't love people, you don't have to love what they do, but you have to love them as the individual that they are and all of the things that they're bringing to your business every day. If you can't love them, then it's not fun and it's not interesting. And
Hmm.
for me, I get the most fulfillment out of seeing our team win, and not in like a cheesy, corny way, but like I know how hard life is. I know how hard it can be for people that maybe haven't been as advantaged as I have been. And so I take that really, really serious every day. And I realize like 9 out of 10 people don't put in the work to try and be better. I get it.
Yeah.
But, one does. And maybe some of the nine. But even if you like, I'm often reminded it's the same thing with the guys I meet that get frustrated with their wives. Paul said, you're to love your wife like Christ loved the church. And like Christ died for people that went to church that didn't even appreciate or know or believe he was who he said he was. So if I go to my
Mm,
workplace, I will serve all 10 out of 10 people, knowing full well that nine of them may never respond to our culture, may never want to better their hand, but that in no way removes my opportunity to serve them. And I think many entrepreneurs struggle with that for all sorts of very, very valid reasons. And at my moment in life, you're hearing what it sounds like to me at this
yeah.
moment.
That's so cool. That's honestly not a perspective of entrepreneurship that you hear often, especially the joy in your voice as you talk about the life of an entrepreneur, the fact that you get to serve people, you get to work with people, you get to build them up. Sometimes they don't want to be built up, but you get to do it anyways. Like that, there's a joy to that that I think can often be missing from especially today in our narrative of hustle, hustle, hustle. Entrepreneurship is the road to wealth and success, not necessarily the road to fulfillment. So I think it's really great that you have that mindset. And I'm wondering, on a day to day, is there a practice or something that you do routinely to help you maintain this joy for the work that you do?
I think part of it is I'm just wired this way. So that
Okay.
I think I come into every day being an eternal optimist.
Nice.
And I think that's more of a personality thing. But since the day I met Lise back in 1998, like we have coffee every morning together, and that starts our day off. Depending on the year, I spend a lot of time reading the Bible. I try to do the Bible in a year.
Hmm.
Most mornings I glaze over most of it, but the discipline of doing it, I think, has produced a fruitful result out of my life. And then I work out. And so by the time my day, quote unquote, starts, like I've already achieved a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
I've already done, spent time with my wife, attempted to put some time in with God in the Bible and listen to what he might be trying to say to me. Most mornings I'm distracted, but I try. And then to work out and kind of knock those things out. By the time I hit a day, that's just been my routine. And I used to do it because, again, if you sort of listen to what I've shared, I just needed some structure. I needed some habits that were productive, and working out was a great way to just relieve some anxiety and some stress. Reading the Bible was important because it was how I was trying to work out my theology and what I believed. And then, of
Hmm.
course, spending time with Lisa, the person who's like along for this crazy ride, and having to make sure that I'm updating her and that she knows everything so that she can make the decisions for our kids and the other parts of our life. You do that, you do it, you form habits, and then those habits end up producing the life that you have.
Man, I don't even, I really have nothing to say. I feel like you said it all. I guess one final word of advice, maybe from you to entrepreneurs who are listening to this, and are really just kind of struggling to find that joy, struggling to maintain it when things don't look as sunny and rosy as they hoped it would.
Uh, well, advice is dangerous because I think for individuals like us, we generally shy away or push back
Right. Yeah, you
on
want to do your own
advice.
thing.
And I don't know about everyone, but certainly the minute someone tells me, here's the road, go left, I immediately go right
Right.
just on
Yep.
principle. Like it doesn't even matter whether it's valid or not.
Yeah.
So all I can share is that for me, when I was really without a compass, and couldn't talk to family members, couldn't talk to friends, because no one really understands how hard it is to be an entrepreneur and a business owner. It was using that pain and that frustration and that stress to come to the Word of God and to understand what it offers me. And if there was advice, it would be try to take your faith like really seriously, like pressure test it, like see if it holds up.
Yeah.
Um, it's one thing to say I'm a Christian and live a quote unquote moral life. But if you're in the throes of it, you need something else other than you and your knowledge. You need wisdom, and God just he'll be there. He will 100% be there, either in the other people he brings into your life, in the for me it was the books, the debates, the content I was listening to that seemed to start connecting all the dots while I was reading the Word of God. I found commentaries were really, really helpful
Hmm.
because it's difficult to read the Bible cover to cover, and
Yeah.
like I don't even know what any of this means, but when
Hmm.
you put the effort in, you see an entire picture emerge if you have like commentaries or someone else helping you piece it together. So it would be just test your faith. Like if you're in a tough spot, there was a reason why the lepers and the poor people and the widows were attracted by the message of Jesus. And rich people, and we never hear about the rich, wealthy people that hung out
Yeah.
with Jesus, right? Like he was with the people that absolutely knew that they couldn't do life on their own and they needed something else,
Hmm.
and he gave them that.
Yeah. That's good. That's a great way to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Dylan.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you for listening to the Business as Mission Canada podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with a friend in business. If you're looking to learn more about Canadian Business as Mission, join our mailing list at businessasmission.ca/updates for free missional resources, upcoming events, and invitations to connect. We'll see you next time to gather and help you grow in your redemptive purpose.